Hey everyone, Steve Weintraub with Collider, and I am super happy to be with Peter and Michael for The Sound of Silence here at Sundance. Before we get started, as I was saying off camera, or before, I just want to give a huge thank you to Kia Telluride for being a great sponsor. The only reason we get to be here is because of Kia, and I just want to say thank you. Jumping into why I get to talk to you guys.
Thanks for having us.
I really do appreciate you guys coming in. This movie, I love movies and TV that deal with professions that I've never really heard about, and I can learn about. And this film deals with a profession I never knew about, and I wanted to know, when did you first discover house tuning, and when did you first hear about it?
I mean, for me, I don't know about the reality of this profession. I know that there are people that are interested in these ideas, including a lot of academics. But to me, it related more to something that I see a lot of people that I've known over the years get into, which is a kind of obsession with feeling better and finding different ways of feeling better, whether it be through their environment, through clean air, what they eat, different types of exercise and medicine. And so I sort of saw it in the continuum of what might exist in that world. But I don't think that there is a real house tuner. Is there a real house tuner, Michael?
Well, not yet.
Yeah.
I bought into what you were selling because I'm
Yeah.
like, in New York, I would figure this is something that would exist in New York City.
Yeah.
And because it made complete sense to me.
On the extremes, we both all understand this, that your favorite song makes your heart swell, and then that irritating noise makes you want to drive a spike through your eye, right?
Sure.
Yeah. But I think that's what my friend actually brought this idea to me. He had kind of invented this idea of the house tuner, and described this gentleman who goes into individuals' homes in New York City, their apartments, and calibrates their surroundings, their sonic surroundings on a musical scale. And as we started kind of talking about that, we developed it into this short film. But I think what was important to me was I never wanted it to be, even though it's an invented profession, I never wanted it to be so far from reality. It's technically science fiction, right? But it's, I wanted it to exist in a very real New York City. And it's, in the movie we have him profiled in the Talk of the Town section of the New Yorker, which is the type of place that would profile an individual like this with kind of an eccentric
I thought
job.
that was real for a while.
And that's good, yeah.
I watched it and I'm like, oh, this has to be real. I totally bought into it.
It probably is somewhere.
Right.
I just haven't found them.
Yeah, we did find there is a gentleman in the city who is kind of a professional soundproofer, and you read about him in the New York Times kind of real estate section every other weekend about some sort of kind of neighbor noise dispute. And we modeled the tools that Peter's character carries in his tool bag off of what someone in a sound engineering field would actually carry.
Yeah.
So we tried to make it as authentic as possible, even though it's completely...
We were really into the tool bag. That was the first thing that I wanted to sort out. I actually know someone who, for kind of very wealthy people, he's based in Chelsea, comes in and makes it so your air conditioning doesn't make any noise, and encourages you to cook on an induction top so there's no off-gassing. And that sort of, extreme control of your environment that a lot of people get into these days is, I think, something that's very interesting. And also the nature of obsession, of whether your obsession be living in a pure environment or living in an environment where the sound is exactly as it should be to make you feel comforted and have less anxiety. This sound is pretty good in here.
Well, take a look. They soundproofed over the last year, which is why they built.
This might be the best room that I've been in Sundance so far.
Perhaps, yeah.
Yeah, I was saying earlier, because we did interviews here. We're at the Mustang Restaurant in Park City, and last year we did interviews, and it's infinitely better this year with the sound quality.
Yeah.
But there's two things I really want to talk about. I loved the opening shot, which is the old New York City and them doing this sound test. Where did that shot come from, and what was the inspiration for putting it in the film?
Yeah. So it's from the archives of the Fox Movietone reels, which were 35 millimeter nitride, and it's a treasure trove of kind of bizarre but interesting documentary footage from that that era of New York. That specific shot is from 1929. We found them in our research that we did when we were writing, but it's the Department of Health in New York City. There was so much kind of, this is around the time of just after the Industrial Revolution. There was a lot more noise in a city like New York. So people were complaining enough that
they weren't used to it yet.
Yeah,
the Industrial Revolution happened, and everyone went, "What?"
And so they hired this group of individuals known as the Noise Abatement Commission to go around New York and record the decibel level. And the decibel had actually just been introduced at that point, so it was this new kind of measurement system. And I visually love that they're using very old kind of vintage microphones and recording equipment, and all dressed kind of to the nines and top coats when people used to dress well in New York City. But they determined at the time that Times Square and an area formerly known as Radio Row, where the World Trade Center was, where they sold upright radios, were the noisiest in the city. And they produced a really well designed pamphlet called City Noise, and it had a lot of data in it to how to stop this, but essentially, almost 100 years later, nothing has changed. We haven't fixed this.
It's gotten worse. We're all just getting used to it, I think. You only notice that you're living in a noisy environment when you go to a quiet one.
Completely.
Yeah.
Well, it's the same with the stars. When living in LA, you don't see stars, and then you go to somewhere else, and you're like, oh yeah, we're in the solar system.
Light pollution is something that could be just ended overnight, right? Literally.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, how about tonight everybody turns out the lights a little bit, and then we could see the Milky Way.
I like that.
Yeah.
Right. I definitely want to know about you guys, how you first met, and that initial meeting. And for you, are you like extra nervous the night before when you're thinking about, I really want Peter to be in this, or
Sure.
you know what I mean? Like, what is that like?
Yeah. Well, I did really want Peter to be in this, and I was fortunate enough to find a way to kind of get him the script, and I wrote him a love letter of sorts, and he responded to it right away, and that meant a lot to me, and we got together for lunch. I think, it's intimidating going in. I was a very big fan, but I think one thing I liked about Peter right away is within moments, and I think this speaks a lot to just who he is as a human and his character. He just he has positive energy right away, and just makes everything kind of okay, and that transition into set every day. But we talked about music right away. You play a fair amount of musical instruments, and you're interested in sound, and
I've always been interested in sound. My approach to music really started on the music theory side, and then I play several instruments, but and I teach music to my kids, for example. But I'm always really interested, even in the most basic ideas of music theory, Western music theory especially.
Yeah, and Peter, I found out, has absolute pitch as well, which didn't hurt for this role.
I wouldn't test it right now, but
my
daughter actually, I think, might. We'll see.
And so I think about time a lot, but when Peter and I met and first talked about the project, it was about a year before we actually physically made the movie. And once he was interested, I felt like it was my job to just keep that momentum going. And he came over to my apartment early on in the process, and we recorded the script just like this on microphones, just so I could start hearing it. And it was incredibly helpful for me, because suddenly, you weren't acting or anything. It was just kind of a cold read. But
I was barely even reading.
It's for the first time, you work on a script for so long, and in this case years, I could just press a space bar and start, listening to the movie. And I had this kind of radio play version of the movie for a while, and that kind of transitioned into an animatic, but was really a blueprint for what we eventually did a year later.
I mean, for me, I look for enthusiasm. I look for excitement. I look for ideas that I haven't thought about in terms of them being films, which this is one. Characters that interest me. I really was fascinated with somebody that was so dedicated to making other people feel better, You know, like literally going into their homes and adjusting their toasters and refrigerators in the hope that it would cure their anxiety. To me, there was something very appealing about that, and at the same time didn't know how to make himself feel better, and actually had virtually only a distant idea that he was actually even feeling bad. You know, somebody whose energy was so directed outside of himself, you know, listening to spaces, looking at people. To me, that's always going to be a more interesting character than somebody who's a navel gazer.
One of the things I also want to touch on is the sound mix. The sound design is a key role in this film.
Yeah.
Can you talk about the sound design? And I believe you said you worked with Dolby.
We did, yeah. We were really fortunate. Dolby had read the script before we even made it, and just wanted to be involved. They were kindred spirits, I think they saw in kind of what they did to what we were doing, and you know, this role, this sound person. So they, you know, we made the movie, and then it's a difficult thing. You know, there's always the caveat when you're kind of at rough cut phases that you know, the sound isn't mixed yet and that sort of thing. But for this movie, it was this tricky little thing, because I felt like it wasn't just the mix; we were missing a character in the movie, and that really didn't, you know, come to life until we were in the mix and had a chance to design that close to when we were finished the movie. So you just kind of had to really suspend imagination for a little bit there. But Dolby provided us with a grant that we could mix in Dolby Atmos, which is a wild technology that I wasn't aware of at the time, but just only knew associated with big blockbuster films and this kind of expensive thing. And for our movie, I didn't quite know how we would be able to use it or what it did, but once we got into it and spent time, and I worked with the mixers and designers, it was, I really got into it, and we could tell the story in this, you know, three-dimensional environment. And we're going to premiere today in Dolby Atmos, fortunately, too, which I'm incredibly excited about, because we can hear the film, I think, you know, in this theater for the first time properly.
Also, it's a newer theater here. The sound and picture in there is really good.
Yeah.
I had to wrap with you so you can actually go to your world premiere. I just want to sincerely say thank you so much for coming in. I hope it's a huge hit at the festival. And again, thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much.